SJ. Welcome to Mvskoke Radio, your weekly source for tribal and community news, interesting guests and discussions, plus a local events calendar. SJ Stongo, Gary Fife, Jaho Jifkados, Mvskoke Radio, Mabo Edjadawedjikis. Welcome to our program, and as usual, we've got lots of fun here with live radio. We were planning to talk with our new Mvskoke royalty here at the top of the show, but that's run into a bit of a glitch, but so we'll move on with our second segment here. We have scheduled online Ms. Jacqueline Pata, who is Executive Director of the National Congress of American Indians. Good morning, Ms. Pata. Are you with me there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Gary.
Oh, well, bless your heart for helping me out with this change here this morning. As I say, sometimes Indians and Indian time get in the way, so we have actually a really good lineup here this morning. In our second segment, by the way, we'll be talking with our TV host about an interview he did with our chief regarding our suit against the Indian Health Service. And that's a question I'm going to pop at you somewhere along the line. But first of all, how are things in Washington?
Well, doing great. I'm right here up at the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, just meeting with them this morning. So good timing.
Oh, my gosh. You're up in the Senate building, is that it?
Yes.
Okay, well, here you are, Mvskoke Radio on the scene, on the spot. Well, first of all, we've been hearing lots of, shall we call them disturbing things coming out of the administration and on Capitol Hill, things that always have scared the dickens out of us when we hear about people wanting to add some cuts or take some cuts, rather, from our Indian programs in the budget. So maybe we'll start there, since that is biggest bang for the buck, so to speak. We are hearing that there are hurtful cuts planned for a number of programs. Now, maybe you want to start us off there.
Well, sure. You know, as the President's budget came out, NCAI reported to Indian Country of the proposed cuts, and some cut programs even being zeroed out, like, Johnson O'Malley programs and other programs. But what we always know is that Congress is the one who actually really has the greatest amount of say. And even when the the administration put forward their budget, they said it was a messaging document. And of course, we were concerned about that message and wanted to make sure that the appropriations committees were rallying behind Indian Country. And, once again, I have to say that the House appropriators have just been amazing. Calvert and, of course, on the, Betty McCollum and Tom Cole and, have just been champions for Indian Country. And we're actually seeing increases being proposed on the House side, very consistent with, and also consistent funding from the previous budgets. They restored potential cuts and restored potential zero-out programs. And I think that we're seeing a much, much better budget that's being proposed. Now, of course, the appropriations, Interior Appropriations, will come back into session next week. This week is the Memorial Day recess, and we're expecting them to take this up as soon as they come back. And so we'll have a better idea what finally comes out of the House and what goes to the Senate. On the Senate side, we're seeing a lot of support in the same way. So I think Indian Country, despite what may have come out of the administration's proposed budget, we're at least seeing some really strong improvements being proposed by Congress.
So we have enough friends on Capitol Hill, you think, to avoid disaster?
I do. I think we, that's one area where we seem to be getting good support is on the appropriations side, and I think it's important. And also, I think the appropriations bills are going to be one of the few things that actually get passed during this election, cycle of this end of the term of this congressional session. And so there'll be a lot of emphasis on trying to get these appropriations bills passed and get them and moving forward. I'm hopeful. At this point, I want to say I'm hopeful, and we'll see what happens when they come back into session next week.
Do you have any programs in mind that still have red flags on them? Programs, budgets that worry you at this point?
Yeah, there's always a number of those, that I get worried about for a lot of different reasons. Programs that we're dealing with, things that are important to Indian country like climate resilience, tend to be a little bit targeted right now, and we want to be able to make sure that particularly those EPA programs that are really important to the tribes administrating, being able to administer their own, EPA programs is really important. I also think, I worry, a little bit about programs. For example, there was the $100 million that was in the budget reconciliation process that was for additional money for housing, but it didn't go into the Nahasa block grant. And I'm concerned a little, not about, certainly want the additional money, right? So there's no issue with wanting that on a competitive, but it's on a competitive basis rather than honoring the formula distribution model. And Nahasa was about self-determination, and so I worry that we are, that there might, I get concerned that there's might not be the support for the kind of self-determining kind of programs that are already in place. And so so in addition to the money, the amount of the money, you also want to make sure that the money comes to Indian country in the right way. And another example of that is the opioid resources. There's a number of places where there's opioid money targeted. Some, we're working with Congress to make sure that tribes have access to those dollars directly like states do, but not in all cases is that currently the place. And we want to be able to make sure that tribes aren't having to go through states in order to get the money necessary or compete to get the money to be able to address the issues that they need to deal with.
Let me jump in here for a second and ask you. You mentioned opioids, and there are a number of tribes that are filing suits against Big Pharma and begging for more support and resources to fight this epidemic. Now, what do you hear on that particular subject? Is there enough voices saying yay that would perhaps provide extra monies or at least adequate resources to meet these battles?
So there is a growing number of tribes who have actually joined in on these lawsuits, and I think which is a really good thing. I think it's really important for tribes to be a part of this national effort to litigate these issues. Because out of it will come some resources that will be distributed amongst the players, but really probably more for how do we deal with systemic ways of addressing things like addiction, prevention, those kinds of addressing some of the harms that may have come from the opioid addiction. But in addition to that, there's going to be likely a lot of policy recommendations. And Indian country needs to be at that table when they make those policy decisions too. So it's important for tribes to get involved. We were late getting involved with the tobacco litigation, but it's important for tribes because of the impact of the opioids in Indian country that for us to be engaged and to make sure our voices are heard. But it's going to be really important for us too to be there through the process to make sure that tribes as governments, once again, are being seen as the responsible entities within Indian country to address the challenges within our own communities in the ways that are uniquely suited to our communities.
Here in Oklahoma, both the Cherokee and our own tribe here, the Mvskoke Creek Nation, have joined in those suits and filed them themselves. These are two of the bigger tribes in the nation. Now, does that kind of weight have any bearing there, do you think?
Well, I think yes, and I know lots of other tribes are considering or have already joined. In fact, Cherokee Nation will be coming and speaking at our conference next week in Kansas City about their lawsuit and sharing a little bit about why and what they're doing, so that other tribes can be informed. We held a national webinar not too long ago. We do a series of webinars on opioids, and one was about the litigation. And once again, Cherokee and other tribes talked about why they decided to litigate, what does it mean for their tribes, and what did they have to do to get prepared for that. So this conversation is very alive in Indian country, and many tribes are considering their options.
No, that's good to hear. Yeah, let me change subjects for a few minutes here. Now, under the Obama administration, he hosted the tribal consultation conferences there in D.C., where the tribes could come in and sometimes almost private sessions talk about their concerns. And the former president would lay out his plan, and the feeling was very good that someone was really listening, and the plan was to have these conferences continue on into the future past his administration. We're not hearing much from the present administration about continuing that consultation, coming in and talking with tribes. Do you have any view on that? Have you heard anything?
Yeah, so when the administration came in, the Trump administration came in, they were very committed to wanting to continue the dialogue and have what we call the Tribal Nations conferences, and they were actually willing to call them the Tribal Nations summits. And I think there's just been a host of reasons why they've been delayed, but mostly because, you have to have conferees in place that will help lead and shepherd the work. They got, and so not having the Asia in place yet, the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs, the Department of Interior, or the HHS director in place, I think kind of were part of the reasons why it didn't make sense. And I think, although it's my understanding with my conversations I had with him recently that this is still not off the table, and that that there will be a looking for future opportunities. One thing I will have to say is, even though they didn't have the Tribal Nations conference right away, or on the scheduled year, last year, etc., but that they did engage with tribal leaders very early. Some of the early meetings that were held at the White House at a very high level included tribal leaders on energy and infrastructure, healthcare. And so, they have been willing to reach out and have these meetings. We just had a meeting on the Farm Bill a week ago at the White House. But, on the energy conferences, there were several of them, and we have some of our tribal leadership meeting directly with the vice president and the president on energy issues. So it's not like we've been absent totally. It's just that I think those summits just haven't been able to get traction yet. But I'm hopeful, and I'm also understanding that it's still on the table, and there's still a desire to accomplish that.
From the national conferences, the annuals and the mid-years, what are you reading in the sense of how the relationship is going between the administration and tribal governments? Is it love, hate, hate? What do you pick up?
I think it's challenging. I think it's challenging mostly in communication. It seems that that seems like that's usually the issue, right? It's usually around how do we communicate and make each other understand where we want to go. So we hear things that come out of, for example, Department of Interior, and there have been statements that have been made by the Secretary, and tribes are like, what do they mean by that? And when we go back to the Department, and the Department says, well, that's not what we meant. It was just misunderstood. What we really meant was this. And I think that the challenge is the consultation is really valuable, not just to be talking about to be talking about policy, but be talking regularly so that we understand each other better. A good example of this is the reorganization. The White House, OMB sent out an email to all of the agencies and said, we want you to come up with your restructuring plan and do it by, June of last year. And immediately we were all nervous because Department of Interior didn't consult with us. And now we hear that, Secretary Zinke has a reorganization plan, but it doesn't include tribes. And when we ask Secretary Zinke in the department, they say, well, it doesn't include tribes because we're not really sure about how we want to include them or what we want to do with them, but we want to hear from you. And so now the department's come out and said, well, we're going to engage on consultation now. And of course, we as tribes have gone to the appropriators and say, don't let them spend any money in fiscal year 19, any of the appropriation money coming up, until they've had meaningful consultation, any money having to deal with reorganizing or moving or relocating people. And I think just sitting down and understanding what is the department trying to accomplish with this reorganization, is there issues that they want to address, and to engage with tribes on that. Tribes are concerned because we don't see what the blueprint is for change that includes us, but we also don't see the questions that they're trying to address. And, I think we have a lot to provide and input, and I think these consultations that are going to be coming up the next couple months are going to be really important for tribes to engage in. And so
we'll be looking forward to hearing about that. Now, joining us in the studio is our host and producer of Mvskoke Vision, Jason Salsman, fellow journalist here, and a guy who pops a lot of questions at people, so don't be surprised when you hear another voice.
Hi, Jacqueline. How are you?
I'm fine. Hi.
I'm great. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I don't know if you guys covered this, but what I was wanting to talk to you about, or I think you gave your thoughts a little bit in written pieces that I had seen, but sort of sovereignty under question, I guess, with a lot of the policy that's come out and things like that, and a lot of the things that are, such as the Medicaid work requirements, things like that, and seeing Native peoples not as sovereign nations to deal with, but just race. And can you talk a little bit about that and kind of where you all have gotten on that, or if you've kind of maybe gotten in a door to explain that that's not really the way it is?
Yes, I'd be glad to talk about that because, that was there was another alarm bell going off for Indian country, right?
Right, yeah.
There was a couple of indicators there. One was one of the early budgets that the administration sent out identified what they called race-based programs, and in there was Indian education and a housing program, and we're like, wait a minute, why are these included in there? These are based upon the treaty and trust obligations of the federal government to tribes. And we quickly went to the administration and tried to clear that up. And we thought that was done. And then when the CMS came out and said on the work requirements, and they said that, tribes couldn't be exempted based that they would be considered a race-based issue, we were like, wait a minute,
right.
Is this a larger administrative policy that, is there a turn? And so immediately we reached out to, some of our friends at Department of Interior and Department of Justice, and we said, we think you need to have a conversation with HHS. We're not sure, is this a broader administrative policy, or is this just a mishap? And, and what we're finding is, and immediately, members of Congress have gotten engaged and were very supportive of helping us to try and reaffirm our political status and political nature. And we got a rollback from the administration that basically said that the states who come forward with tribal exemptions included will be considered, and they're based upon the tribal status. And that kind of told us that they were, and we were also told, that they were rethinking this the statement that probably erroneously came out. But even here today, I'm having ongoing conversations about how do we shore this up. challenges, we've seen a lot of things, whether they be in the administration or with Congress. You know, we had the Tribal Labor Sovereignty Act that we tried to move forward, and we didn't win in Congress, and it was based upon basic acknowledgement of tribal sovereignty, having to deal with the rights of unions to organize, or similarly to states in tribal communities. And, you know, so what it tells me is that we still have a lot of work to do in Indian country to really stand up and to make sure that people understand our history, the foundational basis of the federal government,
yes, and
see us as sovereign government,
right?
The same as any other government,
and I think
respect us in that same light.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
And I just wanted to jump in and say, because I think what gets lost here is that these officials that take this stance and they release statements like this, and like you said, there's just this base in 2018 still, this misunderstanding, this general ignorance of the relationship between the federal government and tribes. And to me, if they want, it's almost like you have to put it to them like this: don't even think about this, guys, as an Indian issue. This is American government 101 politics, to know what the relationship is and the status and the government to government constitutional framework is for these relationships. Fine, let's not make it an Indian issue, but you need to know, if you're going to be an American politician, you need to know American politics, right? I mean, it almost seems like instead of an Indian issue, people just need to realize that you're not being 100% knowledgeable of American government. I mean, right? Do you see it that way too?
Oh, absolutely. I think, and we've got to, you know, one of the things that we'll be talking about at our mid-year meeting is how do we shore up this education? Because it, you know, and I have to give a compliment to NMAI, Kevin Gover at the museum said, we've got to develop curriculum for the schools. They've got to learn at a very early age the things that they weren't taught, because that's what's harming us now, is this lack of information and understanding. So something that we really have to be diligent about is recognizing that it's our neighbors, it's our friends, it's our people in our communities. Everybody influences politics at some point, and they all need to understand the basis of our relationship.
You know, when I first heard that, the thing that struck me was like the ghost of Andrew Jackson striking back. And I'm thinking, you know, as NCAI has written, I mean, you just ignore the Constitution, treaties, federal statutes, and laws, years and years of it, because these people don't know any better. Was it, back in the 70s, a group of Native organizations did what they called Indian Ed 101 for the administration, and had to teach these federal officials, you know, what that relationship was. It was based on a political relationship and not a racial one. And when I talked to LaDonna Harris some years ago, she mentioned that that's what they had to do. And after that, the feds were more forthcoming and understanding of what our concerns were. Do you have any plans like that, or should something like that be put into motion?
Well, it was created. Actually, there's a whole curriculum that any person that works for the federal government that has to do anything with tribes is required to do. Now, I'm not sure if it's being enforced right now, but you know, we will definitely go back and ask them to do that. We've made concerted efforts about educating members of Congress, and I think that we've made some good traction. But it's still it surprises me sometimes when it comes up to a vote. That sometimes people may theoretically understand, but philosophically still haven't made that connection yet, you know, to tribes really are sovereign governments. And they're not an organization with a membership. They're a government that has citizens. And, you know, there are these contracts and you know, these treaties are like, and contracts with the government that are keep accountable that Congress and administration need to be accountable for.
Right. Yeah. Treaties are made between governments and not races.
Right.
Not country clubs.
Right. Exactly.
Well, yeah,
exactly.
And I think you bring up a great point, because I think down here, I know in Oklahoma for sure, we all sort of roll our eyes and kind of when somebody says, I'm a member of this tribe, and it's like, no, please, citizen, and that's just a base level of thinking that you have to kind of chip away at, because as you said, things in place have been left alone for so long, and despite you all and your efforts at that level, as Gary said, it seems like we need a refresher course on 101 going on at the government level. I don't know if it's something that people aren't paying attention to, but certainly you want to see that shift at some point, going away from the membership to citizenship.
Yeah, we've
right, and I think it's partly. I just want to say that's partly the way that we use our own terminology and language too.
Yeah.
Once again, so like nation to nation, government to government, all of those things are really important.
Yes, absolutely.
We've seen letters to the editor here in Oklahoma where people were screaming about this relationship is based on race. And you see that and you think, oh my God, we've got so much to teach these people. Why aren't they paying attention? And we're trying to figure out a way to educate our own citizens here. Yep. Let me shift to another question here in the last few minutes we've got. You mentioned leadership, Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs, and then, of course, the director at the IHS. We've seen a real parade of names in one case, and then finally the name of Tara Sweeney, an Alaska Native, as such as just like yourself there, and finally get sent up to Capitol Hill. Has her confirmation come through, or have they had problems, or is it just not moving?
Well, they actually did have the hearing finally. It took a little while to get it going, and partly it was just because I don't think all the paperwork was submitted, and a number of other things that just takes a while to get through the process. But they have a markup scheduled for June 6th next week from the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs, and so we'll know for sure. Hopefully that will go through smoothly. The way I look at it is it's important to have leadership in place. You need a lot of decisions get postponed, or the right person that's going to be making decisions later isn't there to participate in those consultations, listening directly to the tribes. And so I think, one way or another, the committee needs to do its work, which it's poised to do, and make a decision and move forward, and with Tara's nomination. Tara Sweeney, she's a Nupiaq, from, like you said, from Alaska. And, one of the concerns was, of course, that she's from Alaska and she doesn't have lower 48 experience. And, but I will have to say that the most important thing that this position can do is be a good, strong administrator and hire the right kind of people to be around you, because no one person has all the experience in all areas, no matter what. That's what you rely upon a good team for, but you need to have a good administrator to lead them. Right.
And anything about the Indian Health Service leadership?
That we still have a gap. And in fact, if anybody's got any nominations, send them my way. I reached out to my board and asked if there's any other ideas that people have. And, that's a challenging position. It's going to take someone who has strong administrative skills, someone who can really tackle challenges, and understands the health industry. IHS is doing some amazing work, and there's a lot of improvement that needs to be in other areas. Once again, I think communications is one of the key areas of improvement. But it will, I think it will be someone like me. I think I look at that as a challenge, as an exciting opportunity. I'm hoping somebody out there who's listening will say, this is an exciting opportunity. I want to put my name forward.
Right. And I know that you yourself are Alaska Native, and must have been quite a culture shock going inside the Beltway there. All right. Well, Jackie, thank you so much for adjusting your schedule and speaking with us this morning. We appreciate it, and we will be wanting to talk to you again in the future.
Thank you, Jackie.
Okay. Well, we've got a couple of short
Hey, you
messages to spread.
Let me jump in there real quick, Gary.
Yeah.
I thought it was funny because you and I, coming from the Mvskoke Creek Nation, of course, asking about IHS when we're in the middle of a big litigation with IHS.
Yes, we have.
we didn't talk about that with Jackie, but yeah, that would have been.
No, that is I want to use you in our second half.
Okay, cool.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's roll these messages.
Fourth Annual Mvskoke Creek Nation Festival, June 21st through 24th, featuring the Kids Carnival, traditional Mvskoke dances, arts and crafts, and food, softball, golf, horseshoes, and volleyball tournaments, and the All-Indian Rodeo that started it all. Live entertainment hits the stage on Friday and Saturday nights. All events are free and open to the public. It's the Mvskoke Creek Nation Festival, June 21st through the 24th in Altmalgi.
Red Stick Gallery in Altmalgi, Oklahoma features items handmade or designed by Mvskoke Creek enrolled citizens from all over. Owned by the Mvskoke Creek Nation, the gallery proudly sells ribbon skirts and vests, southeastern designed clothing, jewelry, prints, and many other items. For more information, visit www.creeknationgiftshop.com. Red Stick Gallery, located 105 South Grand Avenue in historic downtown Okmulgee.
We are back here on Mvskoke Radio here on the Brew in beautiful, sunny, and hot Okmulgee. Now, Jason Salsman is here.
We're Hopi this last week, aren't we?
Well, I don't know how those guys in the Southwest take it, man.
They just, I think they just adapt, adapt or die. And they just have adapted and survived, so it's awesome.
Yeah, I heard from a Hopi guy I worked with that said during the summer they eat a lot of watermelon and fry bread.
Oh, yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Words to live by.
Now, we want to shift to the IHS and the lawsuit we've got going against us. Now, Jason, you did an interview with Principal Chief James Floyd on that subject.
Yes, sir, I did. I actually was fortunate enough to get not only the Principal Chief, but the Attorney General of the tribe and the Secretary of Health in the same room. Kind of just talked with Principal Chief James Floyd, though, and told Kevin and Sean if they had anything to add in, go ahead. But the Principal Chief has working for the IHS himself for several years. Is pretty adept on the situation and knows what's going on, and so I found it, it was enough to hear from the chief on the issue and to talk with him about where the tribe stands, why we bring it forth. Some of the pertinent questions that you'll hear in this interview are things that we felt needed to be asked, and to his credit, I feel answered everything he pretty much could within the parameters of what he can say in ongoing litigation. But for us, the main points of course, of any journalist is when, where, how. What's just give us the facts, and so we really were fortunate to get this interview. And do you want to go ahead and play it now, or do you want to wait a minute? Okay.
Now if we were going to write a headline for this story, it would be IHS shortchanges tribe.
Shortchanges tribe. And
4 years.
Yeah, 4 years. And 8 years, 8 years underfunded, I guess, going off of a movie title.
Let's go here.
Let's try it. Mvskoke Media was recently granted an exclusive interview with Principal Chief James Floyd regarding the tribe's lawsuit against the Indian Health Service for alleged incorrect payments of over $94 million to the nation between the years of 2006 and 2014. The following is the interview conducted on Monday, May 21st. When did your administration first learn that IHS funds were not being paid at the proper rate to the health system?
Well, I assumed office in January 2016, and probably that month, in looking at the health deficit, we did uncover the fact that contract support costs for a number of years had not been adequately calculated or paid by the Indian Health Service. And so we began to pursue that and gather data on that matter in January of 2016, and it did precede the administration by a number of years, I think about 10 years.
Chief, this lawsuit, in the lawsuit it says it covers that the rate wasn't properly paid from 2006 to 2014. Have we been paid, has this basically been corrected since 2014? And if not, will there be another suit possibly to get those funds that aren't being paid?
Well, we believe that through a lot of hard work by the staff we have now, that we've corrected the calculations. And let me also clarify that it's not really a simple thing. Because we're a self-governance tribe, we do have a number of shares that comes from the Indian Health Service, and each one of those shares has an attached contract support cost element to that. And so the challenge to us was to go back and make sure that we had everything identified and everything calculated so that we made sure that we were getting the resources that we were entitled to in contract support costs. So, you know, I got to give kudos to the staff that were working on this, the self-governance coordinator, because they did a very good job in leading that effort.
You mentioned the timing and your administration coming in and really what we were dealing with too in terms of health deficit and how that was a big story. Of course, Mr. Terry can remember as well, like his first week on the job, I was asking him about the health deficit. So the timing kind of all converged there. What, if any, correlation is there here that you can talk about? Because like we said, the lawsuit alleges third party, were affected, and then the health deficit covered also mentioned it. So is there any correlation there, or is there any that you could speak of?
If there's any correlation, it's a very loose correlation. And we can go back to the end of the Ellis administration when there was actually a healthcare department excess. And so we knew at that time they had money reserved and put back. And so we weren't in a deficit at that point. And, that's another lane that we had to work and to clarify. And through Mr. Terry and his staff, they've done an amazing job in that. But the contract support cost has been an issue that actually I knew about even before I was elected. As a former Indian Health Service employee, I was very much involved in the first calculations of contract support costs back in the 90s. And so, I knew kind of we had some weaknesses there. And if you don't stay on top of these tables that calculate the contract support costs, then you will not receive them.
Chief, I know that one of the main things that the reason there would be even to file this and go after this really is because we want to recoup the funds, but also you have a responsibility, and so does Mr. Terry and our health system, to make sure that our citizens are health-wise taken care of. How has this snafu, or whatever you call it, by IHS affected the overall health of the citizens? It's had to in a negative way.
Right. In a sense, to me, it's been kind of a personal issue because I, worked in the Indian Health Service in upper management for 11 years. And so it's been kind of tough to go back and talk to people I'd worked with and say, you guys have not stepped up to the plate. And so we started at the area office level and talking to the area director, the regional HHS office out of Fort Worth, and the secretary's office. And, personally, to get frustrated by getting no answer, no response, no offer to documented deficiencies in their system that we've identified and corrected and calculated what they owed us, we had no other recourse but to take it to court. We were able to get a firm that's working on a contingency, and so it's not costing the nation anything right now. And I feel very comfortable and confident of the outcome of this case will be favorable to us. But we just, we hesitated about filing. I did because I know the folks that we're filing against, and these are people that I had worked before, but I also met with them and I said, it's a shame that you aren't making this decision because it's in your court and you should have, take care of this responsibility, and they didn't. And this formalizes the complaint, gets it into a venue where they have to respond, and so we will see this thing through. The benefit that I think the citizens will see is that it will provide us resources to do some things that we would like to proceed with. It's administrative support costs, and so we've kind of had to use administrative support cost money that would normally be funded by the Indian Health Service. It's been funded from patient care. Now, we're not in a deficit. We've not been in a deficit situation for some time now because we've turned that around. The contributing factor wasn't contract support costs, but it's a fund that supports the direct services. So we want to make sure that's correct. We're corrected now. I believe we're receiving the appropriate amount that we should receive, but we weren't for a period of time beginning in 2006. And different administrations, I think, approached it differently. I just, having knowledge of it from the outset, just felt we had to get on this.
Chief, do you know, to your knowledge, if any other tribes are dealing with a similar scenario or a circumstance?
Well, having worked in the Indian Health Service, I could say I was on the receiving end of being sued for the same thing back in the 90s. We prevailed in that case because we had everything documented, and at that time the Indian Health Service didn't have sufficient money to pay that, and out of the case that was from the Portland area Indian Health Service arose the requirement that they fully fund contract support cost. Our case is different in that it's the calculation of it and the recognition by the Indian Health Service of how we calculate contract support cost. So there's been other suits, yes, so we're not the first.
Anything you'd like to close with on this suit?
Well, I think 2 points are, one is that we feel very comfortable that we'll prevail in the case. We have a very good firm, and for the citizens, it's not coming out of healthcare money to pay for the cost of the suit. They're working on a contingency, so if we don't prevail, we're not out any money. So this will benefit the nation and our citizens and our patients.
All right, interview with our Principal Chief James Floyd, done by our Mvskoke Vision host, Jason Salsman. Oh boy, there's a lot of stuff there.
A lot of stuff there.
Now, after having had that discussion, do you get any feel for kind of like what the impact will be on for our tribal members?
Yeah, I think what it does is it kind of, how about, let me rephrase that, what it can be. I certainly can't speak for what will happen. But what it can do, I think, is sort of suture the wound of the health deficit in those years where we had to sort of do without. From 2000, I mean, you're talking a lot of years there, Gary, where the right amount wasn't paid. 8 years. Think about a landlord that only got a quarter of the rent money for 8 years. Probably lose the mortgage on the house. So, it can be debilitating, and I think that for the health system, I think he's got a point. I think they've done a good job to be able to just stay afloat, dealing with that deficit, all kinds of things. So I think it can not only recoup some of that was lost, but also kind of give a boost or a push forward going for the future with what the health system has been able to sort of work with while working under funding and a deficit.
Right, that deficit, just knocked us on our tails there. What was it, millions of dollars there?
Yeah, several. I mean,
some extremely poor financial choices that were being made, and then leadership wasn't following up on so many things, and we come up short. And I'm just amazed that somebody hadn't noticed this before,
right,
and started screaming.
Well, and that was what was sort of in our coverage. I guess you would say unfortunate for Chief Floyd, because he comes in, as he said, January 16, and bam, we're in his face with a microphone going, "What's the deal with the health deficit?"
Right,
and he just stepped in, and I think one of the things that was mostly interesting about that interview is kind of how the moccasins on the other foot now, right? I mean, he just said that he's been sued before when he worked for IHS. I mean, not him personally, but when he was working for IHS, they were sued by tribes. So this isn't something that's out of the ordinary. It's not something that's never happened before. There is precedence for it. And the principal chief certainly knows how these things work, having, as I said, worked for the IHS before and being sued as IHS from a tribe. So you look at it there, and as he said in the interview, it's a very personal issue for him. He still very much knows lots of people at Indian Health Services, and now he's the plaintiff in a suit against them in his capacity as principal chief of the nation. So all of that, plus what he had to tackle right off the bat, he's as principal chief. He's earned his money. You know what I mean? He's earned.
Yeah,
I mean, he's had some tough things to deal with. But I think that, as he said in the interview, little by little, you don't really tackle something of this magnitude at one time. You kind of cut the beast down a little bit at a time. Maybe you take his ankle out, and then maybe go for the knee, and then take the quad. Just work your way up. And I think they've inch by inch, they've sort of pecked away at this problem, as he said. But it's taken a lot of hard work. He referenced Sean Terry and the staff at Health, and they've sort of just had their head down and kind of has meandered through a lot of this. And Sean Terry, another one that kind of came in and said, "I'm the Secretary of Health now, and this is what I'm going to have to deal with." And I think his first week in the office, we were sitting with him going, "Hey, have you ever seen anything like the problems that you're faced with right now?" And to his credit, he sat in the chair, he answered the questions, but also to his credit, we haven't heard much from him in lieu of him just putting his head down and getting to work on it. And when we have asked him, he has been gracious with his time for interviews, but I think that they've really been at it, trying to shore up a lot of holes.
Right, these problems were massive. I mean, they came in and, as you said, to their credit, they got the job done, although it did take some painful decisions there.
Yeah.
Like,
man.
People were, being laid off.
Yeah, you lay people off, and that's a painful decision.
Well, I guess I presume they examined their core of executives there and decided what was absolutely necessary and what might not be as critical at the time.
Yeah.
Now, were there any areas there that stuck out in your mind in that conversation where the problem was the worst, so to speak? Contract health always comes up.
Yeah.
Was it that particular topic? Was there something else?
I think Chief kind of alluded to the fact that that's always going to be a sticky situation and a tough situation to handle, is the contract services. Just from precedence and knowing that we're always going to have to deal with this, and it's going to be tough and everything like that. I think that, a general consensus that I got from him is that he feels confident not only that they can win this issue, but the fact that they seem to have kind of got a handle on the situation,
Right.
and identified problems, and now we're past the identification of problems and discovery of them, and we're in the phase of fixing, and we're almost in the phase of fixed. But I think he said, we're still sort of working to fix and everything like that. Now, a couple of things you got to look for in the interview too. He says, when I asked him about, this references 2006 to 2014. So what about since 2014? We're still getting paid at the rate we're not supposed to be paid at, or if we're not, are we going to get that back with another suit? And his phrasing was pretty telling here. He said, when I asked him that, he said, we believe that we've corrected the problem. He never said we have definitely corrected the problem, so I mean, if you kind of delve into the interview a little bit, I think there's some gamesmanship a little bit in the way that we're talking, because there always is going to be. But
sure, stick your neck out, but not too far.
Sure, and I think that Principal Chief James Floyd, he comes from a life where he's very adept at dealing with media and knowing what he needs to say and what he can and everything like that. And phrasing and whatnot, but I think his general consensus is there's a positive outlook on the way things are being handled right now. Certainly don't want to throw out any certainties. We know it's fixed. We know it to be true. If you don't, so and I think that's one of the first things they teach you if they're coaching you up for an interview is, if you don't know, don't say you don't know. Don't say you know.
I'm glad you asked that question. Right. We're going to undertake a commission to study the problem and issue a recommendation as something that's strong yet flexible and good for all Native Americans.
You've done this before.
Oh, yes, and I've heard the cream of the crop.
Right, you fell asleep while holding the microphone, hearing that very thing.
Oh my God, yes. Your hand seizes up, and you get mic muscle control.
Right.
The time he spent with you sounds really productive. Like he's. We've actually pretty much hit him with some hard questions, and our entire relationship with him,
right.
And he's kind of here it is. Here's what we got.
Yeah.
The situation here, though, with the health is so the overused word critical. Mm-hmm. Now, we mentioned up to about 2014. Now, did he say what happened after that year, 15, 16, 17, 18?
As he was saying, he believes that they have gotten it corrected, and that they are getting the correct funding from that point. So there won't be a need for another lawsuit to recoup funds from 2014. He did reference the staff of the health system, and I don't know if he was referencing his administration health system staff or previous. I don't know. He didn't make that clear, but he did mention the health system staff, and he did say under Sean Terry, but their diligent work to get this corrected. And I think that, you could assume that there's a gray area there between 2014 and 16 when he took over. But I think that he knows for sure, he's going off of, I know what I know. And I don't know what I don't know because I wasn't here before. But what I do know is that since that time, we have identified some pretty significant irregularities and everything in what we're looking at. And not only have we identified those, but we've worked from January 16 to this point. We've been working on just that. And I think that's been a major priority. I think you could say that health has been a major priority of this administration.
Yeah. Now, has anyone talked about a time frame for this for the suit? Does it go to court soon? Is there a decision in the works?
Didn't really talk about a time frame for the suit because we're just kind of still getting everything ready to go. So I don't know exactly when we'll hear from it. I think Chief had said maybe have another update by the fall, maybe, or something like that. That we've got other litigation in place right now, still trying to work out a settlement with the Porch Creeks, and also, got some irons in the fire with this Murphy case coming up,
Right,
we've been talking about a lot. So.
We're going to have to revisit that one.
Yes, sir.
Well, we've got a few announcements here to share,
Yes.
so let's move on to that in a second. But first, before we do that, here's a short pause.
Get ready to make memories. 4 days of free family fun comes to Okmulgee at the 44th Annual Mvskoke Creek Nation Festival, June 21st through 24th, featuring the Kids Carnival, traditional Mvskoke dances, arts and crafts, and food, softball, golf, horseshoes, and volleyball tournaments, and the All-Indian Rodeo that started it all. Live entertainment hits the stage on Friday and Saturday nights. All events are free and open to the public. It's the Mvskoke Creek Nation Festival, June 21st through the 24th in Okmulgee.
Okay. Now, we've got...
who's that nerdy guy talking about the festival?
I don't know.
Yeah.
It seemed like I've heard him before.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, we want to remind you that if you're interested in learning about traditional Mvskoke Creek pottery, there is a mentorship program available that'll be teaching people how to go through and actually make these, how to replicate the pottery that's part of our tradition. So the mentorship will begin June 15th, but if you're interested, the application is May 31st. You want to get a hold of Joy Harjo at 918-232-6868.
This pottery, too, will be done and coached by Scott Roberts. So if anybody out there knows, I've done a few stories with Scott, and he's incredibly talented.
Right. So.
All right, Mvskoke Creek Nation Elder Services Department, they opened the senior games, this event, to all tribal elders this year. That's pretty neat there, because it's always been just Mvskoke Creek Nation citizens. So they've opened it up to all tribal citizens. This was done basically through the assistance of the Elderly Nutrition Program, because they provided breakfast and lunch and everything like that. So, you kind of get numbers. It's a numbers game sometimes, and with them able to provide breakfast and lunch, they were able to open it up to all tribal citizens. So if you want to get involved with the Elder Services and see what they have going on, they always have these events and things like that throughout the year. 918-732-7699.
I thought about joining that once, but I knew I'd get the pants beat off me in jacks. Okay, well, if you have been paying any attention, you know that we now have some new royalty for 2018-2019 Miss and Junior Miss Mvskoke Creek Nation. Nina Fox was crowned as Miss Mvskoke Creek Nation, and Louisa Harjo was crowned Junior Miss Mvskoke Creek Nation. And we want to wish them well, and we'll try and see if we can't get them on the show.
Congratulations, ladies. Extreme heat. Me and Gary just talked about it earlier. Extreme heat this time of year. We're going to be outside a lot. We're going to be at the festival. Lots of people happening and moving around, and 100-plus weather, I think, is what we're going to be looking at. So the Emergency Management Department putting out a statement on heat-related illness during times of extreme heat. Make sure you're taking frequent breaks in the shade, getting plenty of fluids, work early in the mornings to avoid extreme heat, stay hydrated with at least 2 liters of water per day. If possible, wear light-colored, loose-fit clothing that is lightweight and breathable. If you go to like Walmart and stuff, you can get some of those sweat-wicking shirts and things like that. Very comfortable, and then they keep you cool whenever you start sweating a little bit. So that's something good to wear out to the festival. It's something that will keep you cool and keep you away from any heat-related illnesses. So just be mindful of that, and check on your elders, everybody. They're I have an elderly couple, my neighbors, me and my wife. We just love them to death, and their air conditioning went out, so we went and got them a window unit, took care of them. If you can, take care of your elders out there, and then there's a lot, like I said, at this time of year, it's extremely easy to get heat exhaustion.
Right. Here's a special notice. We will be broadcasting live from the festival. Mvskoke Radio will be coming in from the grounds on Friday the 22nd. Yes, will be a special
birthday.
2-hour show. Drop by. We'll say happy birthday to you, and we'll be glad to have you there. So come by the fairgrounds, say hello. We have a special 2-hour show that day, so we're looking forward to the festival.
It's always a fun show. You know, I love being out amongst the people and people coming by and saying, we love listening to you, Gary. We love watching you, Jason. Or, you know, tell us you don't love listening to us or watching us, and we'll try to do better, you know. But It's always good to see everyone.
See you later. You've been listening to Mvskoke Radio. Join us again next week for more local, tribal, and community news and updates. But